So I did a video last week on Jordan Peterson, and I briefly touched upon how he's profoundly impacted my life personally. And to my surprise, many people in the comments were asking for me to actually expand on that story. And I've also had a few trusted friends encourage me to give a bit more of a personal touch to my videos. And I do have a bit of a propensity to get quite philosophical and poetic in moments of tranquility. So if you do like this sort of content, then let me know, and I'll share a few more of my dwellings or meditations or essays, if you will. So with that, here is an essay that I've written about the 7 greatest lessons that I've learned from Dr. Jordan Peterson. The date is November the 23rd, 2022, and I'm making the trip from the Sunshine Coast to Brisbane to see Jordan Peterson live for his Beyond Order tour. My brother and I are in the car, suited up to the nines. I bought the tickets in February and had literally been waiting all year for this. But at this particular time, my mood was a little bit dampened by the fact that I'd been in hospital all week with meningitis and had only just recovered in time for the show. And it was also at a time when I was at a real crossroads in life. I was extremely miserable with where I was in life. I was hating my corporate job in recruitment and felt like a complete failure of a 27-year-old. I'd failed in every attempt that I'd made at entrepreneurship. I'd given up on every single podcast that I ever started, and I was becoming increasingly aware that my passions were sliding away from me along with my youth. And for this reason, 6 months earlier, I'd attempted to sell my soul to a corporate office job that I knew I wasn't cut out for, and failed at that too. And so we're driving along and I'm confiding in my older brother about my woes and being about as much fun as a wet blanket on a camping trip, and telling him about how I have no idea what I want to do with my life, when he turns to me and says, "Jake, I bet you that tonight Jordan Peterson comes out and says something that changes your life." Yeah, right, I thought. And so we arrived and we ambled through the crowd of mostly immaculately dressed young men with a gleam in their eye, albeit self-effacing, awaiting the man that had for whatever reason inspired them to stop dressing like a damn kid. Have some respect for yourself. Stand up straight with your shoulders back, because there's a load for you to carry out there. And with that, you might just find the meaning that sustains you in life. Before too long, JP walked out on stage, the man that I'd been watching, studying and admiring for so many years in the flesh. He spent a few minutes sauntering about the stage and absorbing the energy in the room before eventually revealing the rule that he would be discussing this evening. Imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that. The entirety of the show, he proceeded in a manner that gave me the sense that he was speaking directly to me, and in a strangely fundamental way, addressing all of my inner yearnings and existential anxieties as if I'd written him a personal letter. But I have a sneaky suspicion that I wasn't the only one in the crowd that felt that way and left that venue with a renewed vision for what could be. And so, after this, I imagined who I could be, I quit my job, and I aimed single-mindedly at just that. For the last 4 months, I've pushed myself to my limits and realized how much I can handle. And so here I am, talking to you wherever you are in the world, in the hope that maybe you'll be able to connect with this message, and that I may even have the honor of reading your story in the comments if you feel comfortable with sharing. So, in order to make sense of all this, I have to take you back a little bit. I was a pretty broken kid when I discovered Jordan Peterson. I was 21 years old, living in London, and had a lot of grief that was eating away at me from the inside. I'll spare you the finer details, but my father, my hero and our fearless leader, had a heart attack when I was 14, leaving him severely brain damaged and brutally disabled until he would eventually succumb to his injuries when I was 19. I don't think that you can quite quantify the earth-shattering effect that losing your father has on a young man unless you've experienced it. And for the longest time, I was bitterly angry at the world and at myself, hurtling at breakneck speed towards the dark underworld of victimhood and self-loathing. I blew out to 110 kilos, became quite isolated, and would take out my resentment on the one thing that would love me unwaveringly, the one that would never turn their back on me, my mother, of course. And so, long story short, time went on and I moved to London and had a lot of fun there. Had my first love and my first subsequent heartbreak. I met my boxing coach who taught me the art of discipline and helped me to shed 30 kilograms and was a major catalyst for my transition from boy to man, but I owe him a full video because I couldn't possibly encapsulate our relationship in a few measly sentences. And then in late 2016, I discovered Jordan Peterson when he was first on the Joe Rogan Experience and slowly began adopting his principles over the next few years until it became a crucial ingredient in my life. The way I would describe my relationship with Dr. Peterson's work is that it has been a guiding force in the right direction towards a righteous path. There have been many times when I've strayed and indulged in all kinds of hedonistic, instant gratification pleasures, and these have all been in times where I've veered away from the teachings of Jordan Peterson. And so, the best way for me to encapsulate those teachings is to share my 7 most eye-opening lessons from Dr. Peterson, starting with number 1. Incorporate your shadow. The idea of incorporating your shadow to me is the idea of understanding human nature and that it exists within you, and embedding it and understanding it within the context of yourself rather than pretending it doesn't exist is extremely powerful. Otherwise, when you're confronted with malevolence, you'll just get burnt every single time. And every single time it will be a shock to you because that level of malevolence was hitherto not within your conceptual universe. And understanding history is a very important aspect to this. We have to understand the atrocities that have happened in the past in order to understand how and why they happened and how we can avoid that ever happening again. And I now actually struggle to trust people that are just always smiling and pushing these notions of everybody being inherently good and that we just have to love everybody, because when the barbarians are at the gates, I want to be led into battle by someone who understands violence and has voluntary control over it rather than the other way around. Number 2, imagine who you could be and aim single-mindedly at that. Just to expand on this idea from before, one of my biggest problems is that I'm interested in too many things and that I really struggle to stick to one thing because I'm always being distracted by the next shiny object. This is because I'd always had an idea of where I want to be, but had never created a truly achievable and appropriately ambitious roadmap to get there. When I was a little kid, I used to idolize Louis Theroux, and then later on guys like Ross Kemp and Werner Herzog and Shane Smith. So I dabbled half-heartedly in podcasts for years, probably terrified of actually believing in myself and setting lofty goals out of pure fear of failure. I would often set the bar extremely low for myself and complain when I didn't get the results that I desired, until the aforementioned Dr. Peterson talk. This also made me realize that if I were going to be able to tell important stories one day, that I would have to do it my way. I have to be original and can't be told what to do or say. It's completely not within my nature, meaning that I would have to build my own platform. So what you guys are seeing with this channel is what I believe to be the infant stages of what will one day become a global brand of extremely reliable real-world stories, news, and content. So watch this space. Number 3, don't be a victim. As I mentioned before, there have been many times when I've fallen into the trap of thinking that I was a victim while sitting on my fat ass eating ice cream in my first world house whilst people in Africa toil away in cobalt mines for 15 hours a day, 7 days a week in the hope that they will be able to have one meal to keep their caloric intake sufficient so that they won't die from malnutrition. I've indulged wicked thoughts of thinking that the universe revolves around my issues and what's upsetting me on a given day. I thought that because I'd been through some shit that I was somehow special and that people had to stop what they were doing because I was sad. What this mindset did is essentially stopped me from ever making any progress. Because if you think that the world owes you something, then you are sorely mistaken. You have to go out and get whatever it is that you want from life. One of the biggest switches that I ever made was switching from a victim mindset to a victor's mindset. A victim will sit around all day and say how life is so hard and they can't catch a break and they're not where they want to be because of him or her. The victim mindset not only indulges these thoughts, but takes a perverse pleasure in them and is extremely susceptible to woke leftist narratives, as was the case for me, because these types of worldview are inherently based upon notions of oppression and systemic barriers, and they actually provide the necessary framework for one to exist in such a paradigm. A victor's mindset, however, is about personal responsibility and extreme ownership, as coined by Jocko Willink. Everything that I have been through in my life, I am grateful for because it makes me the man that I am today. And all of my shortcomings in life are completely my fault because if I'm not exactly where I want to be, I made a mistake somewhere along the way. It doesn't matter how many degrees of separation there is from you and what went wrong, you find a way to make it your fault. A victor's mindset is one of the most liberating things that you can possibly adopt because the buck always stops with you and you're never looking for anybody else to blame. Number 4, Find out how much responsibility you can handle. This all begins with Peterson's most fundamental premise, and in my opinion, the foundations upon which all of his lessons stem from. And he gets a lot of stick for this from snooty intellectuals who call him simple and banal, whereas I think that the simplicity of the message is why it is so unbelievably powerful and resonant. Clean your room before you go about reordering the world, because once you do that, then maybe you can get your house in order. And if you can achieve that, then maybe one day you can take responsibility for a family. And if you're proficient in that, then maybe you can become a leader in your community. Dr. Peterson helped me get my room in order and eventually my house. And now I strive to one day take on the responsibility of being a leader of a family and hopefully even beyond that. Number 5, tell the truth or at least don't lie. This is something that's been enormously impactful on my character, as previously I would allow myself to get away with all kinds of lies, whether that be lying to myself or others. I don't know if you'd call it your conscience or your moral compass. One might even describe it as their relationship with God, but this is something that you ignore at your own peril. There's something extraordinarily powerful about being anchored towards truth and constantly having introspective thoughts about whether what you're saying or doing is truthful or if there are other motives involved. With this channel, for example, I'm constantly having that battle with myself with every sentence that I utter. Am I saying this because I believe I'm moving myself and the people listening towards truth, or am I saying this because it's what I think people want me to say and because I want more attention and subscribers? That's something that I'm doing my best at figuring out, and certainly something that I'm getting better at the more I practice. Number 6, to live as though God exists. I used to be a devout atheist and would laugh at religious people and would take pleasure in debating them and telling them why they were so wrong. Before, Dr. Peterson gently nudged me in the path of understanding religious principles and how they actually provide one with the moral framework that allows them to live a meaningful life. Furthermore, I began to see the decadence that would occur when religious beliefs were abandoned on a societal level, and just how catastrophic this is. I began to look around me and see the moral degeneration that has engulfed our culture since we began to collectively move away from God, and the decline in artistic beauty since men began creating art to satiate the fleeting and frivolous whims of arbitrary human desire, rather than creating art to honor God. And number 7, bear your cross. Peterson's talked a lot about the notion of bearing your cross and showing strength, resilience, and fortitude in the face of extreme suffering. And it's an idea that I've actually been wrestling with a lot, and it's made me question the way that I view suffering, and that counterintuitively, maybe there's actually beauty in suffering. You see, when I watched my dad suffer in the most unimaginable and inhumane ways, it never occurred to me that there could be a silver lining. But now, every morning when I wake up, I take a deep breath. And I've become so acutely aware of the fact that I can travel to a brand new city and experience the joy of novelty. Or read great works of poetry by Rumi or Leonard Cohen and feel connected to those artists and poets in such a visceral and timeless way. I've become so moved by and in awe of the fact that my relationship with my family is impregnable. And if he hadn't have suffered in that way, then perhaps we all just would have coasted and never really experienced life. And one day, perhaps it'll be my turn to bear my cross and endure my suffering. And when that day does come, I hope to be able to recognize the beauty in that suffering.